Hello, good evening, welcome to UPFront. Today, we delve into a pressing issue shaping global and regional politics. We're assessing the impact of Donald Trump's victory on the U.S. policy towards Africa. With Trump securing a second term, questions abound on how his administration will engage Africa across key areas. Will we see a continuity in the shift or a shift in U.S.-Africa relations on strategic alliances like trade, aid, governance support, and security? Our panel of experts will help us unpack these complex issues, exploring what Trump's approach may mean for Africa's future. Joining us on this all-important conversation later on is Dr. Vladimir Enchinanso. He's an international relations expert and the former acting director of the Lagos Center for International Affairs and Diplomacy. Also joining this conversation is Professor Bafo Ajimandua. He's a former UN Senior Governance Advisor. Dr. Emmanuel Bombande, a senior UN mediation officer, will equally be joining the conversation. And also from the Parliament of the Republic of Ghana, a former ranking member on the Foreign Affairs Committee, Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa, will be joining this all-important conversation. We should be able to, in the course of the conversation, bring on board the expertise of Dr. Idi Ziblim. He's a former lecturer at the University of Ghana and also the Lagos Center for International Affairs and Diplomacy on foreign policy and U.S. policy towards Africa. Let's dive into this conversation with perhaps an understanding of how the day went for most people who observe from different perspectives. Starting first with, say, Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa. I know you monitored this conversation. I also know that Professor Bafo Ajimandua was at the U.S. ambassador's residence to actually be part of the conversations and seeing the initial win for Trump. I want an immediate reaction from you. Was this expected? Is that what you suspected would happen? Or this is a revolutionary act that's going to change American politics forever? Prof.
Well, thank you, and thanks, and good evening to my very good friends on the panel. Certainly, I never expected this, and from the conversations I've heard from many people, friends and all, including those in the States, that I know, nobody expected that Trump was going to win and win so massively as he did. As you know, he did not only win the Electoral College votes, but he also won the popular vote, something he couldn't accomplish in 2016 when he beat Hillary Clinton. So this was really a massive victory for Trump. I guess American voters, they know what they want. I think maybe they were more impressed with the arguments of Trump to come back again to fix the economy. Because certainly what you hear much from Americans is that the economy has not been too good. People complain they cannot buy houses and all. So I think the economy was high on that agenda. Not to say that the other point that Trump has been reinforcing all along his campaign, which is the migration, which is an excellent topic for right-wingers, not only in America, but also in Europe. Parties that are championing that anti-immigration bills and all on the right, and they seem to be winning in elections in Europe too. So this seems to be a very popular trend in these countries. And I think Trump has really captured the height of this, and I'm very sure it's going to be contagious to those countries where the people believe that foreigners migrating to your country are the problem, even though the problems might be inherent in their own system. So, as I say, it came as a big surprise, and well, that's the verdict of the people. Democrats must accept and live with it.
I have a question for you as to the kind of politics Trump's election brings out or endorses. Is it an evolved kind of politics, or it's quite retrogressing when it comes to the standards that countries like the U.S. have set for themselves? I should be getting back to you on that, Prof. But let me bring in Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa into this conversation right away. You certainly would have had some understanding of what's going to happen. It was a tight race, which people had indicated. But the reality on the ground did not suggest a very tight race. Were you equally shocked by the outcome in this election?
Good evening to you. Good evening to the eminent panel and to all viewers. I have to be honest with you that even though I have always known that Trump outperforms his poll numbers, I did not expect this margin of victory. I thought that Kamala Harris will win the popular vote, and probably Trump may just clinch it with the Electoral College. But as things look now, this is the greatest political comeback in U.S. history. Trump has won both the Electoral College and the popular vote so far. He has also won the congressional race. It's clear that he's going to have unchecked power, and that's something we have to ponder over. Trump having total domination. So, I mean, he's already, if you look at his political style, his character, he likes to have his way. And to have the other arms of government that you will think that could probably bring some moderation to his natural tendencies. We are not going to have that. He's going to have that full support, the full Republican domination. And I know that in a lot of corridors across the world, there are concerns, particularly because in his first term, he didn't appear to embrace multilateralism. He was more isolationist. We recall how he pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord, a pact which was well celebrated by the world. And so, with that background, it's clear that we have to look at this second coming very, very closely. For Africa, to be honest, there were a lot of goodies, I must say. You recall the 2022 U.S.-Africa Summit, where $55 billion was pledged. Yeah. Then when Kamala Harris visited us in March last year, she also pledged some $139 million. The tracking I've done from the level of the Foreign Affairs Committee points to the fact that these are pledges that have not been fully redeemed. Okay. And one was expecting that if there was a continuation, then Africa and Ghana, for that matter, should have some of these pledges redeemed, particularly in the fight against terrorism, which is coming down south from the Sahel, and other partnerships in trade, the Millennium Challenge Compact, and others. So it's early days yet. We remain unclear at this point as to how his foreign policy will look like, and if this time he will pay more attention to Africa than he did in his first term. Remember that in his first term, he was not particularly active when it comes to U.S.-Africa relations.
I'll bring you back in. You already jumped into the area of U.S. foreign policy towards Africa, but I'll bring you back into that conversation. I want a broader perspective now from Dr. Emmanuel Bombande. You've been a deputy minister in that Ministry of Foreign Affairs also before. Let's talk geopolitics. Is Trump's election a sign of greater peace for everybody or more troubling times ahead?
Thank you so much. And my greetings to the great personalities I'm sharing your platform with and all your viewers. Let me say this, and maybe building on what my good brother, Honorable Acquah, said, even in his first term, the world was shifting towards a deeper and meaningful multilateralism. Though Trump was espousing the MAGA philosophy of America first, which is basically trying to go back to a unipolar world. Now, when you look at it from that perspective, he undermined a lot of global cooperation that was building steam. The climate change in terms of the impact of global warming has been mentioned, in terms of his withdrawal from the Paris Club. But don't forget, he also took out UNESCO from the UN system. The question is, are we going to see a different Trump, probably willing to shift more towards the center, or is he going to go more towards the extreme right? Now, to answer that, he doubled down in his campaign.
True.
In the way he lashed out at the Haitians when he looked at the whole question of immigration, and the way basically he insisted on what he was going to do with a lot of the conspiracy theories of Project 2025. But without going in that direction, when you begin to link that towards Africa, and with my colleagues here, one would think that in our capitals, a lot of thinking has already started in terms of how are we responding and what is the African collective response to this historic return of President Trump. And it's in this regard that if you look at the implications for Africa, our interest collectively has been a reform of global governance, both at the Bretton Woods institutions, reform of the UN Security Council, so that we have 2 permanent seats with additional non-permanent seats. Will Trump join this currency, which has gained momentum, or is he going to pull back? But keep in mind that he won because of, though the exit polls in terms of preferences only gave 4% to the voters in America on foreign policy, don't forget that a lot of the frustration in the United States was regrettably the handling of the wars in the world, particularly Ukraine, Russia, and the Middle East by the Biden administration. And he built on, for example, he won Michigan largely on the support of Muslim Americans. And so what does that mean when you look at global peace and how for our interest of global governance, for our voices to be heard, for us to sit at the table as equals, would that be possible with somebody who could go back to the unipolar world? And I wanted to wrap up by saying this. I think that there is a strong movement towards multilateralism that nobody can stop.
Okay.
The mistakes would include trying to start a trade war with China, which will not go down well with many African countries and collectively Africa. And my final comment on this is that would even deepen the expansion of Brexit. I'm talking about the deepening and expansion of the new multilateralism that is emerging out of the UN system that would enable more voices of the global South to be part of international decision making.
Is this a signal of the return of the Trump's kind of people? We know that very strange leaders came up after the global financial crisis, 2007, 2008, within that period. We had Trump, we had Boris Johnson along the line, we had other European leaders who people had questioned whether or not they reflected the proper democratic principles that many were interested in. Is the return of Trump a signaling to the world that the people, mostly far-right in their engagement, sometimes unorthodox, they are sometimes even called candidates who are not beholden to a certain system in the country, and they are strange people because they did not follow the norms that have been established over the period? Are we going to see the return of that grouping like we saw not a couple of years, barely a decade ago?
To a large extent, yes. And before I lose it, when I was talking about the shift towards multilateralism and Africa's collective interest, I should mention the BRICS, because I think I mixed in my tongue something that came out. So I was referring to the BRICS. That must be corrected. But briefly, one of the things we see very clearly, and it includes us, and Professor Balfour's point about Democrats respect the will of the people. And to that extent, we in Ghana respect the will of the people of the United States, whether depending on our ideologies and political inclinations, we like it or not. But the point is this: when ultra-right political rhetoric is rewarded the way it has been done, what would that mean to one of the key challenges in Africa, where leaders don't want to be held accountable according to democratic values, where it has paid to be engaged in the type of politics that is characterized by stepping down and disrespecting the opponent and not respecting constitutional procedures and the decorum that comes with the principles and the values of democracy. So to some extent, as my comrade said, even in the early days, we can begin to read a lot of meaning to that. And the way I look at it is simple. Look at the statements coming from world leaders. Zelensky, in congratulating President Trump, talked about he hopes he will support the principle of peace through strength. But that policy has failed, because that is what President Biden was leading. The African approach was, it doesn't matter what has been violated, let's return to peace through dialogue. And in Africa, we are saying let's dialogue within our countries for the people's will to constantly be respected. And if you look in the past week, look at the political violence that has been going on in Mozambique following the elections, which is a contradiction to the excellent transition we saw in Botswana. So you begin to see that, yes, there could be implications. Yes, there could be sit-tight leaders in Africa who might say, look, even in the United States, being strong, it doesn't matter on what rubric pays. And that in itself could be a challenge that could backlash and lower the progress that we have made as a continent in building democracies across the continent, especially when some leaders are refusing to respect term limits, even in our neighborhood, which is also the basis of insecurity in many countries.
Prof, I want you to weigh in here. Is Trump signaling the return of his kind? Is America once again leading a certain ultra-right grouping back into operation, which many had difficulties with? Many said that was not progressive development, or we had retrogressed, in fairness, when it comes to democratic tendencies over the period. We know how Trump left office. We know how people invaded. Things that nobody thought was possible in the United States happened during the time he was exiting in the first round. Should we brace up for similar things going into a second term?
Frankly, I think we should brace up, because it's going to be a rough 4 years for us. Trump inherently is undemocratic. Just looking at his policies, his actions, and the way he treated his own country. Supporting the invasion of Congress, as you said, on January 6th. Requesting the armed forces to go and beat demonstrators, something that you would never imagine was possible in the States. The way he treated his officers. Look, this is a person who, towards this election, about 150 senior officials who worked with him, including his national security advisor, including his defense ministers. So many of them writing a petition to Americans, appealing to them not to support him. So the Americans know, the establishment knows, and the people that he has surrounded himself with. And I think my good friend Acquah referred to the Agenda 2025, which lays out exactly the names of people who wrote it and who support him, and the plans that they have for the coming. It's going to be a raw 4 years. There's no question at all about that. Unless, once he assumes office, something changes in his heart and brain. Okay? Otherwise, it's going to be worse. Look, my friends have talked about multilateralism, his position on this. He is basically an anti-globalist. He doesn't believe in this so-called global village. America is first, and that's all he's interested in. He's a transactional leader. He makes deals. So look, if Ghana needs something and your lithium is what he wants, he'll strike a deal and just get that for his country. So I think, for me, the lesson that we must learn is not this continuous dependency on the West and its institutions for our sustenance. We have to begin to look inward to see what we can do. A quick story here. Just last week or 2 weeks ago, finance ministers of many African countries went to Washington for the IMF conference. The Kenyan minister came back, and I don't know if you heard it. He said he was so embarrassed as an African because the finance ministers were made to line up on a corridor, and they mentioned you go in for 20 minutes and you come out. How much do you want? 20 million? He said Kenya went in for $200 or so million. So he's telling his people, look, this amount, if we stop doing A, B, C, D, we can easily mobilize it internally. So you don't go and line up like school children at IMF. For me, that is the lesson. It's not what Trump will do to America or to do for Africa. Africans should realize that so far as we allow ourselves to be fed by outsiders, our dignity and our future will always hang in the balance. Me, that's the biggest lesson I'm taking from this guy.
Yeah. Is this a damning verdict, Honorable Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa? Is the return of Trump a damning verdict on establishment politicians, that the people no longer believe in the kind of politics, not just happening in the US, but in countries like Ghana and other places, that they are looking to people of such nature? Let's be clear, he's a convicted felon. For somebody of his kind to lead them, is it a damning verdict on you, politicians?
Well, to some extent, you can put forth that argument, but I will really posit that the rise of Trump is largely the failings of the Democratic Party. You need to recognize that the Americans have stated clearly by the verdict of this election that what mattered most to them was the economy, the cost of living crisis. The Democrats, the Biden-Harris administration, did not give the economy, the cost of living crisis, the importance it deserves. They thought that they could pivot and make other issues what matters to the people. But you see, nothing can replace bread and butter. They thought that making this election about democracy and about abortion rights will sway voters. It didn't work. All the exit polls I have seen points to the fact that the American people voted on the economy first and foremost, and then on immigration. And even with the immigration issue, it is linked back to the economy, where they are concerned that the inability of government to check immigration is leading to job losses, where particularly men who are not college graduates, who rely on certain kind of jobs, are losing out because of the influx of these immigrants. So I think that for establishment politicians, we always must reflect on what matters to the people and focus on that. And I see a lot of that happening in Ghana, where there's an attempt to pivot to make other, secondary issues what matters to the people. But really, that is not what matters to the people. If you read the Afrobarometer, which came out only last week, it was clear that unemployment is number one. 41% of Ghanaians are saying that unemployment is a real issue. The economy, the debt exchange program, the financial sector cleanup, the businesses that have collapsed, it's the economy. So all attempts by establishment politicians to pivot, to shift the goalposts, you see, he who feels it knows it, as Bob Marley will say. And so we really have to come back to the kind of politics which says that, once I feel weak here, instead of confronting my weakness and leveling up with the people and finding concrete solutions, there are a lot of establishment politicians who think that, no, let me rather deflect, let me circumvent the real issues and bring other matters. That is what has led to the rise of Trump. And I must also add that the way the Democrats also made Trump the center of the administration. I kept saying that, look, if care is not taken, you make this man a martyr. You let him get a lot of sympathy. The constant trials and all of that. We know that he had his shortcomings and all. But you see, don't let going after your political opponents take center stage, instead of really focusing on the issues that really matters. Then I must also add another lesson from what has happened, which is the fact that the Democrats have to be concerned about their position on the global conflicts that we have seen, particularly Russia, Ukraine, and the Middle East. Trump was able to convince Americans that, look, a lot of money that could be used to address the economic challenges that you face back home is being pumped into needless wars. They are giving it to Zelensky, they are giving it to Netanyahu, when we could rather sit and talk and negotiate and stop these wars. And to be fair to Trump, probably the highest point of his first term was the ability to keep America away from wars. He did not start any new war. And if you listen to him carefully, he is anti-war. And as Prof said, he's a deal maker. He believes that if I can sit with you, and that's why even though he was criticized, he didn't mind sitting down with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. He believes that he can always strike a deal with anybody, including Putin. And to some extent, I think that is a favorable point. It is a positive. I see a world where he's going to stop the pumping of these billions and trillions of US dollars into these needless wars. And we are going to see, if you like, a return to his first term where there'll be some de-escalation. I was reading Netanyahu's statement where he said that he hopes that President Trump will remember the great alliance between the US and Israel. Clearly, you could tell the undertone that Netanyahu knows that this, business of whatever you ask for, ammunitions, they just write out the check and then Congress will approve and you get all the money you need for war, when the humanitarian toll, the fact that a lot of women and children are being killed needlessly, wars that can be prevented. So you cannot exonerate the Democrats in terms of their pro-war policies, and then the refusal to focus really on the economic crisis, the inflation crisis, the cost of living crisis, and seeking to make abortion, and other matters which the polls did not confirm that really that's what matters to the people. So, to some extent, they have also contributed to that, because look, after January 6, 2021, after 2 impeachments of Trump, many of us thought that he was a goner. There was no coming back for him. But here we are. You can really argue, as I have done, that a lot of the policies of the Democrats have succeeded in bringing him back. And to also return to the other concern you have about if we are going to see the likes of more Boris Johnson of the UK, more of the Viktor Orbáns of Hungary, more of the Bolsonaros of Brazil, even though he lost his re-election bid. Certainly, why not? We have seen a common trend where all of these ultra-right-wing parties have the same strategies. They help each other and they promote the cause of each other, and they believe in nationalism. They believe in capturing their country, being more inward-looking, getting everybody else to stay away and stay in your country. Don't come here. We don't need you. And he's promising very harsher punishment for immigrants. And we must spare a thought for Ghanaians and other immigrants who are out there. If you are not really well documented, God save you. But clearly, these are times for us to be of concern. But perhaps there may be too many domestic issues for him to focus on, particularly with the economy, inflation, getting people back to work.
Well, I seem to have lost Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa there, and I was interested in the point I was making in the last minutes. The other point, sorry, I think I got you back on, but I'm not sure whether your network is still probably strongly connected. I should bring in Dr. Vladimir Enchidanso. Prof, it should be clear in the minds of many people that one of the biggest problems he would have to confront outside of the United States of America is this Russia-Ukraine war, and also what is happening in the Middle East. Is Trump the best man to fix some of these problems, as America has often positioned itself as the big brother who solves problems abroad?
Well, good evening to your viewers and listeners. You say that Trump is the best problem solver. We would be to say something that is outrageous. The point is, it's a global problem, but it depends on which side of the keyboard he is pointing at. We know that he has a soft spot for Putin, and therefore there is a possibility in diplomacy. This kind of relationship bodes well for diplomacy. So there is the possibility that we may find a solution to the Ukrainian problem. As for Israel, I can't vouch on that, because the point is that the Israeli lobby, you have read that book by Mike Sherman, would realize that it's Washington that rules, and the rule of Washington means that the Israeli lobby is very, very strong.
Okay.
And for Israel to be able to snub the United Nations, even shooting at United Nations positions at UNIFIL, defying the ICJ, and saying go with you to almost everything that the United Nations stands for. And America is quiet. Gaddafi didn't do anything of the sort, and America led an invasion of Libya, and we are bearing the brunt. Iraq didn't do anything closer to this, nor has Iran done anything against America. But then you can see the desire of America to ensure that its leadership is not joked with. The point is this, that why I'm saying all this is that the personality of Trump does not come anywhere near to change this, because American interest is supreme.
Okay.
And even if you are veering off, the establishment will veer you on. When Obama was coming, we had all hope of ending wars in the world. Obama rather escalated global wars. There was a troop surge in Afghanistan from about 80,000 to 140,000 during Obama's time. His good speech in Cairo, for example, assured Africa and the Arab world of a peaceful world. But what do we see? So I'm very, very cautious in thinking that Trump is the solver of all such problems.
I want to bring you to a point that I know you have taught for a very long time: global trade and the impacts that's supposed to be on it. Trump is not a guy to really make sure that globalism is promoted across the board. In fact, he had made it almost impossible, and in this campaign, he has taken on China. He has actually taken American businesses outside of the US, and seeking, among other things, to make sure that his manufacturing industries are actually back to operation, like he always says. We had an agreement that's ending next year, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. Do you think under Trump it will be extended, it will be reformed, and it will be actually enhanced, or it will be jettisoned?
Let me correct an impression. It's never true that Trump is a globalist. He is more of an isolationist.
Yeah.
America first principle. But then would want American leadership and coercion to dictate global trade. That's how I describe him.
Okay.
That being said, he would still want to see American trade surpassing almost all trade, like you rightly said. But the end of Acquah will not bode well for American trade. And so that they would continue to have access to African raws, access to African bases, it will be incumbent on him to extend Acquah. And I think the only reason why he may extend Acquah are the reasons I've given. get the geopolitical situation going where Africa is concerned, and ensure that China and or Russia or any other country does not have a stranglehold on Africa. That will be Trump's take.
To your mind, would anything change? Especially, I'm talking about Ghana, for example. Will U.S. foreign policy towards Africa in general and Ghana directly change? Will we still be one of those of high interest to the U.S., for example? Will we still have the relations we are having? Are they still interested, even under Trump, to project what they constitute or call human rights here in Ghana?
Certainly, American foreign policy does not change. We have nuances. Americans don't have permanent friends, they have permanent interests. And the basic interest today for America is to get the raw materials from Africa, ensure that China and Russia do not have space in Africa, and also ensure that they spread American values through the so-called democracy and the so-called liberalism. That Trump will pursue vigorously. For anybody to think that anybody would change drastically under Trump, please no. What might change is the one of ensuring America first, having a strong hold migration. So immigration laws are going to be obeyed the left, and he's going to make sure that bigger immigration is never allowed.
I seem to be losing, but I'm grateful to you, Professor Nchidan. So there, with some thoughts on the current situation, especially from the trade and other international dynamics required. I've been joined by a man who, I'm not sure if he still teaches foreign policy at LESIAD, but I know at the political science department at Legon too, he used to teach US foreign policy towards Africa. Dr. Idris Blim. You're welcome, Doc.
Thanks for having me.
Doc, would anything massively change? What will be the new direction, if there will be change, when it comes to U.S. foreign policy towards Africa? And what should we as Ghanaians prepare for?
Well, just picking up from where my colleague, Dr. Nchidan, just left, nothing much will change as far as U.S. policy towards Africa and for that matter Ghana is concerned. America's foreign policy is largely driven trade, and those policies will not change, no matter what part is in government. The first is protecting the homeland. So whether Republicans or Democrats, they will vote as in it take the Americans. The second principle is promoting and enhancing the well-being of the American people. So America's national interest will always be defended, no matter which party is in power. The last principle that drives America's foreign policy is the promoting of America's values, democratic values abroad. On all three scores, one can make a case that nothing much will change. The nuances may change here and there, but nothing much will change. The only caveat that I may want to add is that we are not in normal times in American politics. If we were dealing with any leader, then one can say, yes, nothing will change. But one of the qualities of America's leadership, especially when it comes to foreign policy, is the temperament of the president. And we have had Trump before, and I think we are very familiar with who he is and what he brings to the table. So my fear with him coming back is not so much America's foreign policy in general towards Africa and for that matter Ghana, but the personality that Ghana, Africa, and the rest of the world have to deal with. And I'm saying this because even as they declared the result, you will find that Republicans have taken the House, the White House, they have taken the Senate, and every indication is that they may take the House. Now, if we were in a situation where you will expect a divided government in America, then I would say Africa should not be worried and the world should not be worried much, because then Congress itself is an important tool in America's foreign policy. But unfortunately, Trump is going to the White House and he's carrying along the Senate and the House. So the check that one will see on him is going to be very minimal. But most importantly, when it comes to foreign policy, where congressmen largely will introduce bills to address special matters on America's values, you will have a Republican Congress that will go along with what the president wants. Now, there is this policy that was actually passed by the Congress of the United States, which is the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act.
Mm-hmm.
So it came out of Congress. It wasn't initiated by the president. Just about 4 or 5 months ago, some 2 congressmen came together to introduce the renewal, because it's coming up for renewal, I think, 2025, next year. Now, you will have Trump at the White House. Fortunately and unfortunately for us, the bill has been introduced in Congress. Unfortunately, there is no much time for it to pass in this Congress. So the next Congress will be the one to pass that bill into an act. That is the Renewal and Improvement Act, AGOA. Now, my fear with it going in 2025, with Trump being at the White House, is what happened in 2018. So in 2018, the East African Economic Community came out with a policy that you can describe as import substitution policy. They wanted to protect the apparel industry in East Africa. They wanted to make sure that they stopped the importation of second-hand clothing so that they could assist their own. When they came out with that in 2018, Trump issued a warning that if any of those countries dare go ahead and implement the ban on importation of used clothes from America, they will be penalized under AGOA. All the countries stepped back. Rwanda went ahead, and Trump came through with his threat. Rwanda was disqualified from enjoying the exportation of its apparel to the United States under AGOA. So that's a clear precedent that when it comes to Trump, he may or he will respect the act, the AGOA Act, that he can decide to transact as to which act to accept and which country to continue to allow to enjoy. And that should be a worry for all of us. I will only hope that hopefully maybe the next Congress will quickly pass the Renewal Act before Trump settles down to begin to do what he wants to do with U.S. foreign policy. But largely, I'm not sure that much will change. The only fear, as I indicated, is that we are going to have a Trump in the White House controlling a Republican Congress, which does not bode well for foreign policy in general.
I am grateful to you, Dr. Idris Blim. I know you are quite far away and engaged. I'm quite grateful for joining us this evening. Dr. Idris Blim used to teach U.S. foreign policy, and he used to also teach LESIAD, U.S. foreign policy towards Africa, putting into perspective specifically the issue of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. But that's not the only thing the U.S. is doing in Africa. For example, there's the President's Malaria Initiative. There is also the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, that's PEPFAR. There is also Power Africa. There is the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Let me bring you in, Dr. Bombande. At some point, should we expect all these to remain or improved, especially since Ghana happens to be have been a beneficiary of some of these programs in times past, or Trump will put less focus, like he did previously, on some of these matters?
From all the contributions of our eminent panelists, we know that Trump will roll back on some of these policies. Now, whether they will all be rolled back or he will pick and choose is another issue, which then goes back to one of the earlier comments by both Honorable Acquah and Prof. Balfour. I think there is a wake-up call on how Africa must respond with the type of leadership that takes into account and is aware of these developments. Because for all of us who believe in democracy, we cannot blame a President Trump who is trying to promote the interests of his own people and his own country. Well, and as Honorable Acquah said, taking advantage of a worsening economy to win an election. And by the way, before even move out of there, keep in mind that those who have really lost in this election will be the small scale and middle level businesses in the United States. Because Trump's tax policies are going to be readjusted to favor the billionaires who are already so filthy rich, but will be paying less in taxes. Because this is where he finds the type of, if you call it in quotes, legitimacy for his money. So let me then end with the question that you were asking. Whether these partnerships, and these partnerships are good in the sense that in international relations, we negotiate bilaterally to gain on the type of interest. And we cannot run away from the fact that as the wealthiest country in the world and is a very strong power, they have the means of leveraging their economy to help Africa where it is needed most. The question is, I think it is now more on us as Africans to believe in ourselves with the type of leadership which responds to President Trump on an equal basis. And the reason I'm saying this is simple. Because our panelists have talked about him and characterized him as a dealer and as a negotiator. When you have an African leadership that affirms itself, beginning first with our self-belief and putting very clearly and articulating the African interest, he might be willing to negotiate on those bases. But if we think that bilateralism now with the United States is, you know, we are a developing continent, help us, please don't roll back on those programs, it will be a big mistake. It's about our leadership believing in ourselves with all the human resource capacities and expertise on the continent to sit at the table and say, hey, wait a minute, you might be the superpower, but we too have interests, and we would insist on that. Now, how will that happen? In February, we're going to elect new leadership at the level of the African Union.
That's true.
Look at what is happening. I am not for an 18-year-old man to become the chair of the African Union Commission. I wouldn't want to go there. But the debate so far is about who are the Francophones going to support, who are the Anglophones going to support, and how you are mobilizing the votes based on the colonial legacy of division. These are, for me, the indications of our own weaknesses, which remind us that we should blame ourselves in these bilateral arrangements rather than putting the blame even under a President Trump that we know very well will not be a good friend of Africa. And indeed, that it will be a rough ride.
I'm grateful to you, to Dr. Emmanuel Bombande, for joining this conversation. He's a senior UN mediation advisor. Let me bring in a former senior UN governance advisor, Professor Balfour Ajmandia. It appears when you put things together, we should plan properly, not only as a country, but as a continent, for the changes that the U.S. is likely to see. Do you think, as a country, we are alive to these responsibilities and we really are taking it into consideration?
Very good question, because some hours ago, I was chatting with a friend over this same matter, and we were saying that, look, if you look at how these European countries are responding to this change in America in terms of leadership change, I'm sure they had position papers already before even the elections, looking at if Harris wins, Kamala Harris wins, what will be the implication? What do we have to do if Trump wins? And I'm wondering, as I chat with you, if any of our foreign ministers in Africa, foreign ministries, ever did that. In Ghana, I don't know, possibly and hopefully so, that they prepared papers, okay, looking at the possibilities and the implication of the victory or loss of any of these candidates. That's how nations work. Europeans did it. I don't know if we did it. Because, as my colleagues have already said, there are serious implications for this leadership change in America. For Ghana, in addition to all what my colleagues have said in terms of whether Trump will sustain and maintain these bilateral arrangements that we have with the Americans, it depends on the State Department, the people that he puts at the State Department, and how powerful they are to influence Congress. And now that Trump also is getting the backing of Republicans in the Congress, hopefully people think he's even going to win the House, then if we have all Republican institutions in government in the United States, then I'm afraid that Trump would have been empowered so much that he could do literally what he wants to do. And from what we know also, those guys in the Republican Party are scared of the man. They can't stand him to argue. So, in fact, I'll have to repeat that we are going to face some dangerous moments in the next 4 years. And that, for me, instructs us as Africans, as Ghanaians, to begin to rethink our whole position in this so-called global world and begin to develop ourselves in such ways that will reduce our dependency on the external world. That is so critical. That is so critical for me. But for now, I think we have to hope that Trump will not roll back some of these things. In fact, he may even strengthen them if we have good spokespeople on our behalf in the Congress, and especially in the State Department, on the desk of the African experts over there. So we are just hoping that, look, we have to rethink, we have to re-strategize, and we have to begin to see how best to bring ourselves up, rather than always expecting somebody from out there to pull us up. That, I think, must be something we need to jettison and be looking forward.
Not long ago, Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa, not long ago, you applauded the position which was communicated by the 71st Secretary of State serving under the leadership of President Biden. That is Secretary Anthony Blinken, about elections in Ghana and the visa restrictions that could go in the way of those who rig, those who undermine our democracy and all of that. With Trump coming on board, do you think some of these dictations will still be in play, or they'll be varied, since the man really is merely interested in pushing his own interest?
Well, first of all, it's important to acknowledge that the Ghanaian elections will happen before Trump takes over. And so that policy will be implemented by the Biden-Harris administration. Having said that, the point which Prof has made has to be emphasized. We have to build the resilience to be self-dependent, to be self-reliant, and we should form a stronger bloc as Africans. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area presents an opportunity. We need to really maximize the potential. Having said that, we need to also cut down on this individualist approach, trying to cut deals with these Western nations, not as a bloc. And then we also must watch the Anglophone, Francophone divide, particularly at the time that you are seeing all of this anti-French sentiments and the French pushback. So let us begin to look within, and let's remember that the Americans also need us. Often the conversation is one side. You have a situation where terrorism is on the rise after what they did in Libya, the assassination of Gaddafi, that invasion without a post-Gaddafi plan. It has, portended trouble. And you are seeing the terrorists becoming stronger than ever. We are the only country that in the sub-region has been preserved. They need us. Remember, we have the U.S. Ghana Defense Cooperation Agreement,
Certainly.
which they will want to maintain. So we also have levers which we can leverage on, and those should guide us moving forward.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining today's edition of UPFront. Many thanks to you also for watching.